This week on Quality Digest Live, Tim Lozier of ETQ joins us to talk about enterprise quality management and risk.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Plus, why can't managers sustain improvement? That and more when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for October 18th, 2013. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Dirk Ducharme, editor-in-chief of Quality Digest. Well, diesel, electric,
Gas.
Not gas.
Okay.
Definitely not gas. Diesel or electric? That was the question addressed by Georgia Tech researchers when it comes to delivery trucks. Which is more cost-effective and environmentally friendly, diesel trucks or electric trucks? And the answer is...
Survey says?
Yeah, it depends.
Of course.
According to the study, the advantages of electric versus diesel depend largely on how the trucks will be used. Not too surprising there. The frequency of stops and average speeds, of course, and get this, the source of electricity for charging batteries, which should be something that all of us think about when we think about these kind of things, and we'll get to that in a little bit. In city driving with frequent stops, for instance, the electric trucks outperformed the diesel vehicles. In urban delivery routes where you have a lot of start and stop driving, for instance, electric trucks are about 50% more efficient to operate than diesel trucks, and this is, again, according to the study, making them at least 20% less expensive than diesel-fueled trucks. They also produce about half the greenhouse gas emissions than their diesel counterparts. Most of this, if you think about it, is simply the efficiency of electric motors at low speeds. Electric motors are much more efficient at moving things and they're low torque and high torque and so forth at low speeds. Makes them a lot more efficient than internal combustion engines. But also, of course, the regenerative braking systems that you find in these kind of vehicles also contributes to that. However, electric delivery trucks lose their advantages in suburban routes that involve fewer stops and higher average speeds. Electric vehicles have a limited daily range and top speed, and without a lot of stops, they lose the regenerative braking advantage. They can also cost more than diesel trucks, particularly if high-cost charging systems are used, or if the battery must be replaced early, or if they are used mainly for highway driving. So here's the bit that I was looking for in the research and that I alluded to here a little bit earlier. The research team took into account the sources of electricity used to charge the electric vehicles when evaluating greenhouse gas emissions. Electricity produced from hydroelectric sources, more common in, see out here in the West Coast or in the Northwest United States, dramatically reduced total greenhouse emissions for electric vehicles operated there, compared to, let's say, coal-fired electricity sources, which you might find more on the East Coast or in the South, and so forth. So vehicles operated in states heavily dependent on coal for producing electricity showed higher emissions, overall emissions. Remember, we're talking the emissions that you get from the vehicle as well from the emissions, equivalent emissions used for generating the electricity that goes into charge the vehicles. That said, in every state in the United States, electric trucks provided some reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, with urban routes providing the most advantage. In about half of the states, the electric trucks cut greenhouse gas emissions by a third or more compared to diesel vehicles. So, see, this is something a lot of people overlook when looking at alternative energy. And I'm in favor of alternative. I love alternative energy. I love all the technology that's out there for it, but there's no such thing as a free lunch. The whole law, conservation of energy and all that, that's in play. There is no free energy. You're paying for it somewhere. You're paying for up front or you're paying at the end, but somewhere you're using it. Electricity to charge a vehicle has to be created somehow, so you have to take into consideration how that electricity is generated. Once you do that, the equations can change quite drastically depending on how the vehicle is being used, as they saw in this study. By the way, for you gearheads who want to know which trucks were compared to each other, the comparison involved a 2011 Smith Newton electric truck powered by a 120 kilowatt electric motor and a 2006 Freightliner powered by a Cummins diesel engine. The two trucks had approximately the same gross vehicle weight, curb weight, and payload, and they also used, they tried to make them equal in the types of routes they were driving and so forth. So basically everything being equal other than the fact that one was diesel one was electric. But I love this bit. I mean, this is something that we forget about quite often is we look at solar panel. Free energy. Well, no, it has to be built. All the materials for the solar panel have to be mined. They have to be transported. The solar panel has to be built, has to be shipped to your home. Then it's free energy.
Well, it's like anything else. In any process, you have to look at all the inputs.
You have to look at
all the inputs and understand really what's going on to make a fair apples-to-apples comparison. But with that said, the research does seem to indicate that in most cases, electric is better in terms of not generating as much emissions.
Yes. Yes.
In most cases.
In most cases, what it looks like right now. So it was an interesting study. We're going to see a lot more of those coming along because you are seeing more and more electric delivery vehicles as well as consumer vehicles, cars and so forth, knowing where to use them, where it makes sense to use them over diesel or gas-powered engines is going to make a difference going forward in terms of what consumers are going to hopefully make wise choices when they buy. So.
Gotcha. So that's Georgia Tech, right?
Georgia Tech.
Georgia Tech. Good stuff from Georgia Tech. We always like running stuff from them. All right, well, another story that we like talking about, and as we all know, the draft version of ISO 9001 2015 now is working its way through TC 176, Technical Committee 176, and eventually, at some point, it's going to be released to the world as an international standard. Now,
early next, well, and the draft, the one that comes up for review again is going to be due out in early 2014.
Right.
Exactly.
But we're going to talk now about this last one, this last draft, which came out just not too long ago, which
and people had a chance to review.
To read it right now. QD contributor Umberto Tunisi wrote an article for us about this latest draft of ISO 9000 2015, 9001 2015. In his article, Beethoven's Fifth and ISO 9001 2015, an expert's view. And that appeared in Tuesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Now, the current version of the draft standard, as Dirk just mentioned, was made available to the public for comment for a limited time. Now, I like this article. I read it through, and a very dense article, rather long article. I appreciate it. I think you're going to appreciate it too if you haven't read it, because it offers a really close reading of the language, a preview of the language of the standard as it's iterated in the fifth version of the draft. And Umberto has a little fun with that. It's the fifth, he says, it's not quite as, it doesn't sound as sweet as Beethoven's Fifth, nor smell as sweet, I think, as Chanel No. 5. But in any event, I'm not going to spend time right now pounding through the article. It's a rather lengthy article. You can read it again right below the player page right down there. I'm not going to go through this clause by clause and point by point. Because Umberto did that. But what I want to talk about is the process here. And I want to talk about it kind of as a comparison between what Umberto's saying, going through the language of the standard as it was written, as it's in a draft form, versus what Denise Robitaille wrote last week. We had an article from Denise where we talked about in QDD and on the show.
And by the way, Denise Robitaille is a member of TC 176. Yes. That is the committee that is responsible for ISO 9001 and the revision that's going through right now.
And although I think Umberto's not on that committee, he is a long-term auditor.
He's been an auditor for a long time.
He knows what he's talking about. Because what Denise wrote about here is that she cautioned against, last week, reading too much into this evolving language and not taking actions based on that, because, as she said, and I'm paraphrasing here, if anyone tells you that they know what ISO 9001 2015 is going to be all about, they're wrong. Well, yeah, I think she's right. We don't want to take too much action on this based on what the draft says.
But it's important to at least have a feel for it.
I think that's what I'm going to come down here on. I think it's what Umberto's saying too, is it's valuable now to start looking at this and start understanding what they're talking about, because this is going to go into the standard at some point. The standard, as it's going to be published, is going to be an evolution of these things that are in the drafts as they go forward, and I think that we're going to see that happening. Now, Umberto's point, and really what he's talking about here is risk in a big way. This initially appeared on a CERM website that we ran, which is talking about risk and risk management. And he's looking at how risk is kind of rippling through the standard. And I think, well, again, we don't want to have too much public discussion about it because we're not sure, but I'm certain that risk is going to be a big part of ISO 9001, the 2015 version. And I think understanding that and understanding how the users are commenting on it, how we're commenting on it, is going to help the TC 176 understand how to shape that a little bit more as we get into 2014 here.
Right. I mean, that's the whole goal, is that there's a whole goal why the standard was released as a draft, is so that people could, could comment on it, get back to them. I mean, that's the whole purpose of this whole process. And
well, I don't think that, just to wrap this up, because I know we want to move on, but I don't think that what Umberto's saying here and Umberto's comments are incompatible with what Denise is saying. Umberto is an auditor with deep roots. He understands what he's talking about. He's not telling you to take action. He's not saying this is going to be in the standard, make sure you start acting now, which is what Denise cautioned against. Don't start taking actions for your process. But what Umberto's saying is let's understand it. Let's start understanding the thought process of TC 176. Let's maybe start commenting, if we feel like we want to, about how we feel maybe language as it regards to risk, what we feel about it, because this current standard doesn't really define it very well. It just says you need to be aware of it, the current version of this current draft. You need to be aware of risk, but it doesn't define what that means. Maybe we need some more definition on that. Maybe the pushback should be...
And maybe that will be there, and that's kind of Denise's. And we're kind of playing these off of each other carefully because
well, they're both valid. That's why
they're both valid.
Very valid points.
The reason they put the standard out there, obviously, so people can look at it, get a feel for it. As long as you understand that if you're seeing comments on the standard, regardless of whether they come from Umberto or anybody else. Take them with a certain amount of caution, because you don't know what the standard is going to look like when it's going to come out. But you will get a feel for it. And we know for sure that, for instance, risk, among other things, but for sure, risk seems to be a component that is going to be in there in some form, some shape or fashion.
No doubt. So be aware of it. I think it's good advice to take it with a grain of salt a little bit, but definitely be aware of how this is evolving, especially if you're a registrant to ISO 9001, and you're going to need to be aware of that going forward.
Right. Well, speaking of risk, we have been talking about risk management for quite a while now, and it's a topic that's gained a lot of traction really over the past few years. I mean, I remember, Greg Hutchins was telling us 5-6 years ago or more that this is going to be the next big thing.
And he was right.
And he was right. It is a huge thing now. And it's even more so now, I think, because the proposed, as we've just been talking about, the proposed ISO 9001 standard may be integrating aspects of risk into it. So it's important to delve into the topic some more. So with us via Skype today is one of our risk management experts, Tim Lozier of ETQ. Good morning, Tim.
Hey guys, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. So first of all, just to make sure we're all on the same page, when you're talking about risk management, as you will be here in just 30 seconds or so, what do you mean by risk management? Define it for us as you look at it.
Yeah, sure. Risk management is really a broad concept, and it encompasses many facets of the business. At its core, risk management is a process by which we identify hazards, threats, things that can impact the business. And once we have those threats and hazards identified, we want to attempt to quantify them. We want to measure them. So we look to tools like risk assessment and different types of risk tools to try and come up with a measurement, some sort of ranking on how we can quantify them. Once we've done that, we can then put in controls, preventive measures in place to ensure that we can mitigate whatever risks we have. And that's essentially the process. But once we've done that, we want to actually go back and put it into our existing operational processes, quality, safety, compliance, so that we're augmenting what we're doing today with a risk matrix or a risk methodology. And then we want to continue to evaluate over time the risks that we have. So once you've defined your risks and you put controls in place, it doesn't end there. You want to be able to go back and reevaluate over time, see if there's new threats, there's new hazards, see if things have changed, you change your business, has your risks changed? So really, risk management is this overreaching process that closes a loop on identifying potential systemic issues, and we incorporate them into our daily activities.
Well, I mean, in your article, you say that you're seeing risk management make its way into ISO quality management system standards as well. We talked about. Why is that happening, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. I think over the past few decades, we're starting to see a new way of looking at quality, compliance. If you look at businesses today in the economy, we're facing a high degree of complexity. Whether you're talking about the global market, you're talking about customer demand, supply chain, mergers, acquisitions, things are moving at a fast pace. And we have this complexity and this pace and this demand, but we're also required to be compliant. And so the question becomes what's the acceptable level of compliance we're required to have? Is 100% compliance acceptable 100% of the time? The reality is it's not necessarily the case. So what you're looking for is what's that level of compliance that you want to achieve in a complex, fast-paced business. And risk is really becoming that benchmark to say, let's quantify what we have and let's take actions to get within that acceptable limit of compliance. Now, when you look at these standards, the ISO standards and other regulatory standards that are out there, they're really the benchmark for what companies are looking to strive towards. They're the framework. And so what you're starting to see now is that these architects of these frameworks are starting to realize that this complexity of business, this pace of business is driving this risk message. So you're going to start to see risk management concepts start to creep into these conversations and these frameworks over time. So I think it's a great step that the ISO is really taking that hard look at risk and really putting in some proactive framework methodologies within there.
Tim, your article again, which we ran this week, and all of you can read underneath the player page right down there. In your article, you also talk about how not everybody in an organization maybe speaks the language of quality or safety, for instance, but we all speak risk. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by speaking risk as an organization?
Well, when you look at a business as a whole, there's a lot of different processes. We all have different processes that we have for achieving compliance. So, safety has their own processes. Quality has their own processes. But so does finance. So does IT. So does the supply chain. So when you look at all these things, you want to try and find a way that the top level corporate decision makers can interpret what's going on at these lower levels, these operational areas within the business, and make really good decisions, especially when we talk about complexity and speed. So what risk is able to do is to really level that playing field. So what you're able to do is by building in risk, you're augmenting the process, you're using your existing processes, but you're putting on a level that allows decision makers to go in, see a universal concept of, okay, what are my top risks here? What are my top risks here? And take actions on them. Not only just actions on individual areas, but look at risks as a whole. So you may have quality issues or quality risks that could relate to safety, finance, supply chain. So what risk is able to do is really create that holistic view of what the compliance challenges are and make better decisions. And so risk is really powerful in that sense.
So does this mean that people are going to have to learn a whole new set of tools for risk management? I mean, that's going to be the question our viewers are going to be asking. It's like, okay, gosh, I'm having to learn to do all this stuff for ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. Is this going to cause work for those people who are already involved in other compliance activities at their work?
Well, in truth, a lot of companies are already doing some degree of risk management in their daily operations today. They just don't view it as such. So, when we do next week's webinar, we're going to talk about some of these common tools that are used in quality management today that can be used as risk tools within their processes. In many cases, it's not a giant leap to take what you have and just be able to quantify it in a risk standpoint. Now, that's not a blanket statement. I mean, there's plenty of organizations that have really involved risk-based strategies, and both flavors are good. But the reality is that risk management process is designed to augment or tack on to what you already have. But instead of using your adverse events, conducting your adverse events and correcting them, you're building a quantitative measure that assesses a risk level. And you're still able to do what you do, but these tools are designed to help you, achieve risk compliance without having to make a giant leap.
So, speaking of tools, then, this is probably a good lead-in for this next question: is what is the best way to prepare for upcoming risk management activities, or even compliance, even?
Well, there's several ways you can get started on this whole risk journey. The simplest way is really just to go out there and start surveying your operational areas. A lot of companies will go and they'll go survey managers, and they'll survey these different stakeholders within the different operational areas, looking for what are your top threats. Don't think in terms of risk. Just say, what are your top hazards? What are the top risks? What keeps you up? And by doing that, you're able to collect this data. And once you've collected that data, you can start to build a common theme for each of these. And we call those taxonomies of risk. And what that allows you to do is say, here are the categories where all our operational areas have said, these are where the risks are, these are where the hazards are. And by building this taxonomy, you can actually start to put them into buckets and start to quantify the different areas within risk. And what you're able to do is now when you go through your processes, whether it's quality, safety, compliance, what have you, you're able to take those taxonomies of risk, quantify them using risk tools, and be able to make better decisions, and really tack on this risk management process to what you're doing today. And that's really the power. You want to be able to identify your threats, you want to quantify them within your existing operations, and then build a risk view that allows top management to actually see the entire picture from a macro level and make better decisions based on risk. And that's how people are going to be able to keep up with the complexity of business in today's new economy, and also make better decisions and stay compliant.
Okay. Well, Tim, we're going to hear a lot more about this on a webinar that's coming up
Tuesday.
Tuesday, that's
Tuesday
right.
the 22nd.
Maybe we can pop that slide.
Yeah, we have a slide right there.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, Tuesday the 22nd, there you can see it right there. It's 2 p.m. Eastern and 11 a.m. Pacific, and you can register for the webinar right on the player page, I believe, or right into Tim's article.
Actually, I believe the link on the below the player page will take you to the article. You can read more about what Tim was talking about, as well as some hints and tips there, but there's also a link at the top of the page there that will allow you to register for the webinar as well.
Check it out. Deep dive on that. Tim and Dirk are going to be hosting that on next Tuesday, so look out for that. Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, guys. This was fun.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks, Tim.
We'll see you next week.
All right.
Okay.
Good stuff. Yeah, it's a good webinar. You know, risk, we talked about it twice today on the show. I mean, it's not going away. I think people want to know about it, and I think it's good to know about.
And I think what Tim said at the very end there is really important, is even if you aren't actively pursuing a risk management compliance program or a standard risk management program in general, I think the process of going through, the exercise of going through, at least at this point, of identifying what your risks are,
sure,
even just a list, so that when it comes to that point where it's time to start putting some sort of somebody, your boss comes to you and says, hey, we got to start doing risk management, you've already got maybe a short list of, well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because here are what I think are the critical touch points for risk in our organization. I mean, it's important just to start thinking about it. It's important to be doing anyway, I think, for in any part of the organization.
Absolutely. So. Understanding risk is always a good thing. Okay. Well, we have another article here that I want to talk about. Our own Hariharan, When the Thrill is Gone. When the Thrill is Gone. D.B.B. King. Great man. When the Thrill is Gone. And that article appeared, I believe it was on Wednesday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. And what Aaron is writing about here, Dirk, and it's great, I think, because it's something we can all relate to, any of us in management, is that managers, especially CEOs, tend to be those quicksilver, creative types, right? And they're great at coming up with ideas, but what they're maybe not always so great at is sustaining those ideas and taking those ideas from great ideas into great products, great services, great implementations that actually move the business, right? I mean, that's oftentimes what top management doesn't do. Well, this is really contrary to W. Edwards Deming's 14 points. And his first point he referred to as constancy of purpose, which is great. We always talk about constancy of purpose. That comes straight from Deming about 40 years ago, where he said that management in particular needs to have a dogged, hard-headed, constant, continuous pursuit of excellence. And you need to wring every piece of value out of those ideas, because if you don't, you're really suboptimizing each great idea. And by the way, I found this in my research. Did you know that it was Deming's 113th birthday earlier this week?
No, I didn't know that.
October 14th, 1900. Deming was born, and he would have been 113 this Monday.
He would have been really old.
He would have been just like a typical, I'm surprised he didn't make it that far. I mean,
I know.
these quality guys live forever. He was 93, but because he passed away 20 years ago already. It's amazing. So in any event, an organization, even a large one, and I think maybe large organizations have this problem more than most because they have so many people creating ideas and such a large management structure. Any organization can only efficiently handle, really handle, so many great ideas at once. And the end goal here is to, again, not necessarily just create them, just spin them out. The fun part of brainstorming and coming up with these ideas. The end game here is that you want to drive them home. You want to wring all the value out of each one of those ideas, because oftentimes that 5, 10, 20% margin of, geez, do we really think about all this, is where the sustained excellence really comes from. That's what Arun is talking about. It's not that far different from Henry Ford's principles, right? Where he would use every single piece of a piece of metal, every single one, every single inch of that, every single molecule he tried to use, because it was more efficient. You're going to wring more profit out of it. Now, I think, Arun didn't say this, but I think that there are times when a moderate success is worse than a failure. Aaron didn't say that, but I kind of read into this a little bit. I'll tell you what I'm saying here is that an out-and-out failure often is pretty quick. We've all had some failures in life where we're like, wow, that didn't work, right? Yeah. And you can get off it pretty quick. You know, you don't have to really invest many times a lot of resources and effort in it. But those moderate successes can oftentimes grind down the overall success of an organization because you devote a lot of resources to it. Well, it's kind of working. You know, it's doing good enough. It's breaking even. Maybe it's making a few percent on the investment. The ROI is okay. So let's continue to shovel resources to it. And what happens is, you didn't get every piece of value out of the great idea. You started an idea, management started it, people started to implement it, management got bored or tired because it's not that much fun to sit through strategy meeting after strategy meeting to really see how you're going to dig into this, and they move on to something else, come up with another great idea. Meanwhile, the first great idea that maybe could have really been a home run now becomes a single. And those singles after singles after singles, eventually are going to drive you out of business.
Well, I think there's another issue as well. Is I think sometimes, and look, I mean, to tell the truth, we have faced it right here at Quality.
Well, I'm going to talk about that. Yeah.
Sometimes you get a jillion ideas.
You do. Yeah.
And then you're frozen by the quantity of ideas that you have sometimes, and so nothing gets done.
Right.
Because you freeze on where to concentrate your efforts. So we've had that happen to us.
Well, I was going to say that. You know, we're in the middle of that right now. We're coming up with new products for 2014 right now. We're coming up with things that are offers to our readers, ways that they can use our information better, ways our advertisers can use our information better and connect better with the readers. And we're really going through that right now. The idea of we're having a lot of meetings trying to dig into the bottom levels of this, so we don't leave good ideas on the table. Leave them undeveloped. And it's hard. It's hard for a small organization. It's hard for a big organization. I don't care what kind of an organization you are. Resources are important. If you're going to devote resources to a great idea, and you started it for an idea for a reason, everybody bought in and said, that's a great idea. We're going to make a lot of money on this. It's going to be a great benefit to our users. Let's do it. And then 3 months later, you
got to carry through.
Yeah, you're doing it. I mean, you often do it, but are you really doing it where management is engaged all the way? That's what Aaron's saying, is that people aren't doing that. And I think that, again, we're hitting singles, and hitting singles isn't necessarily going to win the game. You have to turn those singles into doubles, triples, and homers, and that's the way that I think great organizations become great organizations, stay great organizations for now and for the future.
And I think also there's probably a morale thing that comes in here too. Is like, I mean, if somebody comes up with a great idea and you start implementing it and then you drop the ball on it, as an employee who's coming up with great ideas, after a while you're going to go,
to heck with it.
Why bother?
Yeah, I'm not going to, it never goes anywhere, or it starts and then it can never get finished. So read this article, good article again by Aaron, we got below the player page right there, When the Thrill is Gone, BB King. And Aaron, Harry Haran, take some advice from that. I think it's good advice, good valuable insight. And check that one out.
That's right. Okay. Well, now we're going to move on to the tweet of the week.
Tweet of the week.
We always have our eyes open.
We need music for this week.
We need some music for this. That's right. Daniel, get that going.
Of the week.
We need some music for this. So today's tweet of the week is from Jeff Lindsay. No debt ceiling now. Government printing presses too few to meet demand. Counterfeiters need to help ASAP.
I like that. As a man who has a counterfeit shop set up in his garage, I think that's great. No,
crank out the money.
Crank. Well, to tell you the truth, I don't know that's not necessarily monetary policy. The debt ceiling now is what is it raised to 17 trillion or whatever the heck it is? Who knows?
It's just funny money.
It's just funny money. Doesn't even really matter. It's just electronic credits anyway. All right. Well, thanks, Jeff, for that great tweet of the week. If you have a tweet of the week, check it out. Send it to us at qualitydigest@twitter.com.
By the way, if anybody hasn't noticed, if you're in the habit of going out to some of the technical, being our audience, government websites, they are open now. Mm-hmm. So if you go out to NIST or you go out to Livermore Labs or wherever it is like you like to do to get your Geek Fest on, those are open. So there you go.
All you geeks, line up.
All you geeks.
All right.
Labs are open.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, for being there today. Thank you, Tim Lozier, for joining us on the show today. Talk about risk management. Don't forget about the webinar. Again, coming up next Tuesday, the 22nd at 2 p.m. Eastern. 11 p.m. Pacific. You can sign up for it now. And we'll be back at you next week with another great week of QDD and another great week of QDL here on Friday.
There we go.
All right. Talk to you then. Have a great weekend.
So long.
Bye.